So Mike Bond, the MMA media titan, is going to join us for this segment as we talk about the BMF title fight. It is a title fight, folks. It's a title defense, I should say. And the exciting thing about not just that fight is 155 pounds, like Go says, it's always popping. There's 4 fights at 155 pounds. So let's examine those. Again, welcome, Mike. The BMF title, man, what's your whole take on it? It's being defended. Pay-per-view points come along with it. It should route you towards a title shot at some point. But I think Gaethje recently did some stuff with someone I know. You know, like what's that whole deal about this BMF fight?
I mean, I think we've talked about this a lot over the years, right? For Masvidal and Diaz, it felt fitting because Diaz kind of created it with the post-fight call-out and everything and pushing for that fight. So I was cool with them doing it then. I thought the Poirier-Gaethje fight was a pretty fitting way to bring it back to, just given the amount of wars those two have put on and the level of excitement. And I think this is a good way to do it too. Like, I mean, we're kind of past the stage of being like, oh, should this be a thing? Should it not be a thing? The UFC is clearly behind it. Dana White, said after the first fight that they wouldn't be doing it again. And look where we are now. We not only have had it brought back in, but we have someone defending it in Justin Gaethje now. And he can create his own little bit of lineage here and being the first to defend that. He told me the other day that would mean something to him. So I guess, this is part of our culture now a little bit when it comes to this BMF belt. I don't think it's going anywhere. We'll see what happens with this fight. But could anyone say, I mean, pushing aside the fact that this is messed up 2 weight classes seemingly at lightweight and featherweight. No one really wants to see either of these guys lose. There's all those elements of it, but like the fight itself, it's going to be amazing. You put it in a vacuum, like it's going to be absolutely fantastic. So I can't wait for these two to get in there. I talked to both guys in the past few days and they all seem very much there mentally, physically. Very curious to see how Max Holloway looks back at lightweight, and we know what these guys have to offer. So I'm absolutely stoked for this.
That said, is it the people's main event?
It's got to be, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. You talk to a lot of people, obviously, at events that you cover. People hit you up probably on social media. I'm wondering, are they more drawn to that fight when they pick your brain than the other 2 title fights?
I feel like, yeah, there's definitely some interest in Alex Pereira. Like he has become, I think, one of the prominent stars in the entire sport. You look at his numbers, things like that. He's definitely up there. There's the reason he is the headliner of this card, for better or worse. But if you look at kind of the total package of both sides of a matchup, this one has, I think, more so than anything on the card, like on this main card, especially, right? Like Bo Nickel and Cody Brundage lives in its own world when it comes to this main card. Oliveira is a superstar as well, but Arman Tsarukyan probably has some work to do. You guys just talked about the main and the co-mains. Both of these guys are probably 2 of the most beloved fighters in the entire sport. So this brings it on both ends of the spectrum.
This is a fun one, right?
This is a fun one, yeah.
Yeah, this is, look, the main event, the co-main event, they make sense, right? When you look at statistics, when you look at streaks, all that stuff, they make sense. This is the one that we're just tuning in for fun. This is what separates UFC 300 from other cards. So I'm down. I think it's people's main event.
100%. It's the people's main event. I mean, this is the type of fight that you would put together with your friends, talking at a bar. Like this fight is amazing. The only thing that doesn't sit well with me, and I don't know about you guys, but I don't know about the whole BMF title being in place here. The fact that it's being defended again, like Mike said, I think the Diaz and Masvidal made sense. But now I feel like, what is the BMF, right? Like, because yes, these two are scary as shit once they're in the octagon. But outside of it, I mean, we've all been around them, right? We've interviewed them. They're some of the nicest people we've in this sport, literally Max Holloway and Justin Gaethje. So what is this BMF thing? And at the same time, you're putting it on top of what you've labeled a title eliminator, and we'll get to that in a second, Oliveira and Tsarukyan. Like, what importance does it have here in the division? And I just feel like this whole BMF thing is a bit unconclusive. We don't know what the future is. Is this the last title defense of it? Is he just going to keep defending the BMF belt? I don't know. That doesn't sit well with me. But 155, Gaethje, Holloway, absolutely love it. You can't complain about that.
The other 2 were 4 years apart from each other, and it almost just seemed like, it was the right time. Gaethje, Poirier, 2 gangsters. The other 2, they were gangsters. But then all of a sudden, this one kind of came in, and I think it had to do with we say it all the time, the schedule that the UFC keeps and what they need. Sometimes they have to create stuff. That's why I've always championed just close the weight classes at 65, 75. you know, you'll add another belt that way, and then you don't have to do this BMF thing. And I think the BMF thing worked when it was right. Has to feel right. Right now, title defense. Just tell me Gaethje and Max are fighting, I guess, because Gaethje wasn't next for Makhachev because he was injured or because of Ramadan or whatever. But title defense, I don't know. I do like, though, and it's been pointed out that I guess the pay-per-view points do hit one of these guys, or
at the end of the day, it's a gimmick, like more right? Like the UFC doesn't do a ton of gimmicks, but this is one that they brought in out of the necessity that you kind of laid off. Like, I don't think this would have been brought back if they had an appropriate headliner for Salt Lake City with a real fight in a real weight class, a real title fight for that card. But they needed a main event for that second pay-per-view in July of last year. The thing worked and they brought it back. Masvidal had retired. So like, it was just a circumstance, something to attach to make it seem like there is a championship fight on the card. This one, you can say there's 3 title fights. Like it's very much a gimmick, but man, like, tell me Justin Gaethje isn't someone who well represents what this belt, I guess, was supposed to be. Maybe, as Danny said, like the side of him as a person, maybe not, but like as a fighter, come on.
As a fighter, yes, but I do feel like you have to have at least one battery charge in there, or at least a couple of recorded street brawls here and there, right? Like in a backyard in Miami somewhere. I do feel like that's fitting, man. But I want to ask you guys, because I generally have no idea what's at stake here. Because, like, again, this is the first ever title defense of the BMF belt. Like, what's the future going to look like? And I wonder, because there's so much attention to this fight, if the winner does something impressive. We've seen title eliminator bouts not be title eliminator bouts. I love Oliveira. I love Tsarukyan, but I don't think it's too crazy to think that the winner here could go on and fight for the belt next. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Man, UFC's crazy. They'll do some crazy things, but if Max Holloway gets a win here, that's kind of a tough pill to swallow, especially because, you know, the division below, we want him there. We want him to fight Topuria. So I don't know that something like that would happen. But, you know, it is interesting what you're saying, like what can actually happen with this belt, because when I sit back and I think, like, I don't know how many of you guys last night watched WrestleMania. I'm not the biggest wrestling fan, but they drew me in with their storyline. And when I was watching that, I couldn't help but notice this new era, right? Without Vince McMahon. You saw a logo in the middle of the ring. You don't see that. You saw a lot of advertisement. You have to think that the UFC and their business is probably influencing a little bit of what's going on over there in WWE. And I think the same thing can happen coming back the other way. And I think that's why this BMF thing, that seems like something that would happen, right? In WWE, the hardcore title, all these weird titles that they have. I think they're going to kind of play off each other. And to answer your question, Danny, I think it's going to be a while before we know exactly what this is going to be, because I think they're kind of trying it out and seeing how we are all going to react to this. But title-wise, it's so tough, man. Like, they really put themselves in a pickle and they really stretch things out for us. But I'd rather see Max Holloway go down to 145, even with the win.
The easiest way, guys, is let's unpack it like this. Let's just say Gaethje wins. What happens, Mike? How does 55 shake out?
Well, he already told me the other day, turning around for June 1st, if they want to put Islam Makhachev on that card, UFC 302 in Newark, he's highly unlikely to do that, even if he goes out there and takes no damage and knocks Max Holloway out in the first round or something. That would just be a lot. It's 7 weeks to the day. And we've heard Justin Gaethje say many, many times, I need a full camp. I take my preparation seriously. I don't do short notice fights, et cetera, especially in this circumstance where this is going to be his final undisputed lightweight title shot. You'd have to imagine. He lost to Khabib. He lost to Oliveira. He's done the work, especially if he wins this fight, but you'd have to imagine that's do or die for him. So he's not going to take it, I don't think, under unideal circumstances, which opens up, as we saw, Islam Makhachev calling out Dustin Poirier for that card. Maybe he gets the shot. But what Gaethje said in his perfect world was the winner of Oliveira and Tsarukyan ideally comes out unscathed of their fight. They fight Makhachev on June 1st, and then he fights the winner of that at Madison Square Garden in New York. That was in November. That was his perfect world scenario. And maybe it could happen. He dropped a line being like, you know, if Charles wins, hopefully he doesn't shit the bed again, meaning pull out of the fight, not take the fight on the date the UFC wants, et cetera, et cetera. If all this happens, like let's say Poirier gets the fight in June, And then who knows what happens there, right? Like who gets the second fight with Makhachev later this year, either in New York or Abu Dhabi, wherever he fights. Will it be Gaethje if he wins? Will it be the winner of Tsarukyan versus Oliveira? The person who doesn't get it is going to be pissed off. So there is a lot of moving puzzle pieces here. I don't know how close they are to booking the UFC 302 main event because tickets for that card go on sale Friday. And we know the UFC likes to have main events in place more often than not when putting tickets on sale for a card. So I don't know, like, are they going to be pressured into making the Dustin fight happen, or are they going to try to extend this a little bit, see what happens on Saturday? Maybe the winner of one of these two lightweight fights comes out completely unscathed and they convince them to make a 7-week turnaround. But it's going to be tricky here. Yeah, I think you just got to win your fight. Hopefully you come out healthy as possible and see what happens.
Danny, what happens if Max wins?
Oof, I honestly think that's the best result for the sport. It'll make things super exciting at 155 because all of a sudden you have, I mean, tons of matchups available, right? Like him, potentially a trilogy with Poirier if we're interested, Connor, Chandler. I mean, there's so many fights that make sense. Or he could even win and just go, okay, Ilia Topuria, yeah, you beat the champion, but did you beat the baddest motherfucker? No, here I got a belt to prove it. Let's go, you and me, 145. I just kicked some ass at 155. Thank you for holding the belt. I'll be there in a second. See you in Spain. I think that would be the most exciting result for the sport. But, man, Gaethje is so hard to beat. So I think if Holloway wins, man, it's a party at 155 and 145. I think things just get really, really interesting.
All right, we want to focus on 55, but I want to include the chat, and this person made an attempt here. We'll stick with Danny. Making the Walk MMA says, we know what happens if Max wins. He has hella options. What happens if he loses? What are the best options? I think what he means is, can he come off a loss in an exciting fight against Gaethje and still make a run at Topuria, or does this somehow affect 45, or do they decompartmentalize? What's your take here?
I think it affects him a little bit. Obviously, if you get a win, it's far more convincing to get a title shot, especially where there are other contenders there. Obviously, the immediate rematch with Volkanovski, Evloev is out there as well. So I think it's possible that he could get a title shot off a loss, especially if it's a competitive one. But it definitely hurts his chances. I think at that point, Volkanovski would be the front runner to get a rematch.
The chat's blowing up. I'm telling you, this is the people's main event. Karate Ted Toon says Max is very aggressive lately and will brawl with Justin instead of being the smartest boxer, excuse me. Stick and move or get hit and lose. RTTV says Max versus Justin is definitely the main event. UFC done messed up. Todd, here's a nice little joke. We got to move on. All right, listen, guys, let's talk. Yeah, he's been cracking this joke for a while. The intruder against Anthony Smith. I get it. It's not a bad one, but we got to focus on 55 here. Mike, Tsarukyan and Oliveira. Is Oliveira in any form of a doghouse because of him not stepping up? I mean, it was a cut. He really did have the cut. But remember, there was other times when he was suggesting a fight night in Brazil instead of going to Abu Dhabi. So Let's say he just starts with Tsarukyan. Is he now present a valid case for next?
Oh, come on. Yeah, of course he's got a valid case. He probably deserves it right now, but yeah, he definitely shot himself in the foot a little bit last year, not only pulling out of the title fight in Abu Dhabi on 12 days notice, but he did pull out of the fight originally against Beneil Dariush that was supposed to take place in New Jersey, right, in May, and that's why they ended up having to put Bilal Muhammad and Gilbert Burns on that card on very short notice. It did get rebooked like 2 months later for the Vancouver card, or a month later, but still you're causing the UFC to scramble. It's all that stuff. He pulled out 2 fights last year. It needs to be said. So I get why he had to take another one.
A concussion too.
There was a lot of all of this that we're talking about, the BMF title, all these things that are happening right now. Dustin Poirier maybe getting a shot, this, that, the other thing. They're all because Charles Oliveira pulled out of that fight with Islam Makhachev in October, right? Like, if not, we're probably not getting the BMF title fight on this card because Gaethje would have had his title shot probably in February already or March. So the whole thing is kind of the aftermath of what Charles Oliveira did there. So I would maybe understand if he's a little bit in the doghouse, but at the end of the day, he is one of the most beloved fighters in the sport, one of the most decorated fighters in the sport. I don't need to list all his records. We know how amazing his resume is. So he goes out there, wins another one. He's ready, available. I think he's very much in the running for a shot. I mean, you're comparing him to, if we assume Justin Gaethje wins here, he's got the head-to-head win over Justin Gaethje not that long ago. So he's got the good case for it. It's just, again, with all these things, timing, situations, et cetera, but I would have zero issues with Charles Oliveira getting the next shot after this if he wins.
Let's give a good case scenario. Tsarukyan waxes Oliveira. Can he leapfrog Poirier and Gaethje? Let's say Gaethje wins, right? Or Max, whatever. But can he leapfrog all of these people? Or is he just kind of a side piece right now? You know, like, yeah, it's a title fight, but really the spotlight's on Oliveira.
You know what I think is massively important here, no matter who wins these fights, is that mic time in front of one of the largest audiences of all time. If you say the right things,
win the crowd.
People will start, win the crowd. I think they'll start to consider it. But when it's all said and done, I mean, if Justin Gaethje, like, I feel like it kind of hurt him a little bit just to say no right from the get-go. I probably would have just waited just to see. Maybe you walk in there and you knock him out with the first punch, and maybe 7 weeks doesn't seem as bad, right? I don't know. I feel like maybe he could make a better case for himself, but I don't think he can leapfrog, man. I just don't think that at the end of the day, I don't think that's the fight that everybody wants.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Danny? What's your take on this whole mess? Can Tsarukyan cause something that's him the win? Being flexible and being ready, and a vicious finish, and then mic time, not just post-fight, but come on, these guys need to put on a show. I'm expecting a lot at the pre-fight as well.
Yeah, I think this pretty much this UFC 300 card is more or less on audition to see who gets Makhachev. I do think any of the winners here can get it. I mean, they one would have a win over a good name, a solid opponent, and two, I mean, depending on what that they say on that mic, what interest they cost in the champion. Let's not forget, I think Tsarukyan likely has or gave Islam Makhachev his toughest fight apart from that, you know, that one loss against Pantoja, of course. But yeah, I think this would be a fantastic fight. So between Tsarukyan and Makhachev. So I think it's possible that he could leapfrog everyone if he were to beat Charles Oliveira. So super interesting stuff at 155. I just kind of want to know, what I'm curious is who has the best shot at beating Makhachev? And believe it or not, I think it's going to be Tsarukyan. I think out of all the four main lightweights competing at UFC 300, I think the guy with the best shot to beat Makhachev is going to be Tsarukyan, in my opinion.
Could be. Some other great action happening at 155 pounds. Mike, Moicano versus Turner. This one's got like a fight of the night feel written all over. I know there's some great fights, so it's tough to really say two fighters are the favorite for that. But you know what I'm saying, right?
Just the fight of the night going to be 3,000 or what?
That's up to you. Aren't you the one that made the pitch for 200K or something like that?
That's up to Dana White. I'm not counting out, but sorry, go on. I interrupted you there.
Yeah, Turner and Moicano, man. What do you see? Is this the bloody brawl of the night?
I don't know. It's so hard to predict. I mean, we just talked about freaking Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway in a Charles Oliveira fight, so it's hard for me to be like, this is going to be the best lightweight fight of the night.
Moicano's a bleeder. I love that guy. He's scrappy. He's a bleeder. He makes it interesting. I love
Moicano too, but I think we just saw in his last fight that if he needs to, he is willing to take a risk-averse path to victory, right? And Jalin Turner, like, this is pretty clear where one guy is the best, and Jalin Turner is probably the superior striker here, and Moicano is the better grappler, submission guy. So you could get to a stalemate, a one-sided fight, something like that in this sense. It's just a matter of how it goes down. But yeah, the potential's there. Anytime you have two ranked lightweights fighting, like, it's going to be good. How often do those fights turn out badly, no matter who you take out of those rankings and puck in that octagon? So I'm expecting a good fight.
Danny, does the winner of that fight maybe get someone that loses one of these other fights that we've discussed at the top of 155? Kind of like a graduation of a higher ranked fighter. Do you think that that's their next move as well? So some important for both guys here?
100%. I do think the winner here kind of automatically becomes the dark horse of the 155 division. I mean, Moicano's got world-class skills. Turner has physical abilities that no other lightweight has. So I do feel like the winner here is going to get a big step up. And that's what I feel like these two guys have always been waiting for. Like, they're kind of popular with the fan base, especially Moicano. They're very skilled, but they've yet to break into that sort of Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler territory. But I don't think that's too far off. A win here at UFC 300, massive card. Good promo, especially if it's Moicano. Dude, people are going to be clamoring for a big fight for either guy next. So yes, 100%. This is a huge moment for both.
Goes Jim fucking Miller's on this card.
Yes, sir.
I mean, you know, like that poster, Miller was on that fight card. He was on 200, where Mike Bond suggested they give out 200K. I love that, Mike, by the way, to all the bonus winners. And now he's on this one. And Bobby Green, another OG of the sport. We saw him at Affliction in 2009 when he was a youngster, a young pup. Now he's a vet. Tell me about this fight, what it means for both guys.
Well, I mean, Jim Miller, you know, he's talked about how close he's been to just kind of hanging it up at times. And really, I think this is the type of fight that's going to prove a lot, right? Like, he's a guy that you should never count out in a fight, no matter what his age is, whatever. He's just a crafty veteran. He can get in there and he can pull off a W. But you look at a guy like Bobby Green, and it's a little similar in the sense that he spent almost his entire career trying to prove everyone that they're wrong. He's always the underdog. He's always the guy that people say, well, you know, we don't know. I feel like Bobby's attack is controlled chaos, right? If he can keep it dialed in and not get wrapped up in the moment, the fact that he's fighting on UFC 300 against Jim fucking Miller, if he can keep it dialed in, I think he should just be quicker than Jim Miller. I think he should beat him to the punch. I think he'll be a little bit too much for Jim Miller. If Jim Miller, I think, look, he can't give Bobby Green any room to breathe. He can't give him room to do anything. He's got to get in his face and try and get a hold of him. But I think this is one of those other fun fights that I wouldn't want to say there's a whole lot on the line for either guy, but it's just a fun fight that we all want to see.
Mike, should this be Jim Miller's swan song, win or lose? You've covered the sport for a while. You've seen a lot of these. Does this almost have like that feeling of, yeah, this could be it?
It does feel like a pretty perfect moment to walk away, right? But if he wins, this would be his most high-profile win in a while. He'd be on a nice little run here. So I don't know how many fights he has left on his contract, if he's maybe due for a raise. These kind of things, right, are all intangibles when it comes to something like this. So yeah, if he wins in a pretty clean, convincing fashion, I think he goes on. I do think he is keen on that idea of making it to 50 UFC fights. That would be another 5 after this. So maybe it happens. We'll have to see how this fight plays out. A lot of interesting questions about both these guys, right? Like, what's Bobby Green going to be like after taking that absolutely hellacious overdue stoppage against Jalin Turner? That's one that could completely change you and your durability and all that stuff as a fighter. So I'm curious to see, like, if Jim Miller goes out there and one punch KOs him or something. I think we wonder a lot of questions about Bobby Green's future, even more so than Jim Miller's maybe after this fight. So yeah, a lot on the line for both this guy, but Jim Miller, I mean, to me, in a way, like, the results almost don't even matter for him anymore. Like, him just going out there and continuing this Iron Man streak of having all these fights is impressive. But yeah, if he can up that all-time UFC win record to 27, that would be pretty amazing. And then we can start talking about maybe being the first fighter to ever reach 30 UFC wins, which would be a whole other level of achievement. So we'll see what happens.
And Danny, you saw Cold Coffee doesn't have to dig for Jim Miller highlights. That guy, the one thing, he just doesn't slow down. Notice no one really says Father Time. We're just more than anything just saying, wow, he's been a lot of scraps. I guess could it be time? But no one's really saying he's dropped. So your thoughts on his longevity and how rare it is at 155?
Yeah, there's very few guys that, and I feel like Rafael Dos Anjos is a good example. Like, they're prime and then they have a drop, but then they kind of just hit a plateau and they just still remain a very, very good fighter. I think you can say that for Dos Anjos, you can say that for Miller, you can say that for Jose Aldo at the end. So it's damn impressive. Like, dude, he fought at UFC 100, he fought at UFC 200, and now 300. I mean, I can just sit here and just praise Jim Miller for the entirety of this episode because he's Jim fucking Miller, right? Like, this guy is a legend. But I would like to say I would love to see him retire if he were to pick up a win over Bobby Green. Dude, he'd be 6-1 in his last 7 fights, UFC 300. You know, Bobby Green is a top dude as well. Like, he's been around for a while. It's a good name to leave, as Mike said, probably the best win he's had in some time. I don't know. I've just seen so many bad retirements, you know, losing streaks or, you know, getting kicked out of the UFC, etc. That, like, whenever you can have the option of a nice send-off, you should take it. And I feel like 40 years old, it's time. He's still looking good, but that's probably why you want to walk away at this point in time, right? I don't know what his financials are because that's a whole thing. But man, it would just be perfect for Jim Miller, a good guy of the sport, to get such a nice send off. UFC 300, Bobby Green. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, legend.
Narrator voice. They never walk away at the right time. So I wouldn't get my hopes up.
Sadly.